They didn't just ignore your suffering, they applauded it. They didn't just misunderstand your pain, they celebrated it like it was entertainment. But what they failed to realize is this: your agony was never just personal. It was a divine announcement. Heaven wasn't silent because it forgot you. Heaven was silent because it was convening. While you were weeping on the floor, stripped of dignity, strength, and trust, God was preparing a courtroom, not to condemn you, but to weigh the hearts of those who watched you bleed and laughed. And now the verdict has been released. You weren't the one on trial. They were. Your breakdown was not a curse. It was a holy summons. The narcissist didn't know that when they gaslighted you, lied on you, and mocked you, they were mocking the voice of God himself. And what began as slander in the shadows has now become evidence in the hands of a just and righteous judge. This is no longer about betrayal. It's about judgment, and the sentence has already been written, in the silence, in the suffering, and in the smirks that heaven did not overlook. You were the warning they ignored, and now what they laughed at has become the very thing God is using to bring them under divine conviction. The unseen courtroom. God was watching, even when they mocked you. There were moments you thought no one saw, moments where the loneliness was so deep you could feel it in your bones. Nights where you collapsed on the bathroom floor with your hands shaking and your soul screaming, and you begged God to either fix it or take you out of it. You felt abandoned, you felt discarded, and worst of all, you felt like no one cared. But someone did, and not just anyone. The judge of heaven was watching the entire time. God wasn't distant. He wasn't late. He wasn't silent out of indifference. He was silent because he was observing, because every courtroom must first observe the evidence before issuing a verdict. And you, beloved, were never the one on trial. You were the test. You were the lens through which God examined the souls of those around you. The narcissist didn't just fail to love you, they failed to fear God. They failed to realize that when they mocked your tears, they were mocking the very God who permitted them. When they ridiculed your breakdown, they ridiculed the sacred process of spiritual refinement. While they whispered, "She's too emotional," and rolled their eyes at your trembling voice, heaven was recording not just their words, but their hearts. Do you remember how they smirked when you reached out for help? How they walked away cold and calm while you unraveled? Do you remember how they made jokes about your trauma? How they retold your story to others, not with reverence, but with relish? Every time they dismissed your pain as manipulation, God wrote it down. Every time they called your boundaries bitterness or your silence pettiness, God marked it as spiritual arrogance. And every time they justified their cruelty by pretending it was your fault, heaven called it what it truly was: hardness of heart. You didn't just suffer, you suffered before a divine audience. And this courtroom, the one you couldn't see, was not passive, it was active. Angels took notes, heaven held its breath, and God with perfect patience waited, not because he didn't care, but because he wanted to give them a chance to stop, a chance to apologize, a chance to weep for the pain they caused. But they didn't. They hardened their hearts. They kept mocking. They kept lying. They kept smiling in public while slandering you in secret. And now the courtroom has shifted. What was once silent is now stirred. The judge is no longer just seated, he is standing. His robes of righteousness are prepared, his gavel is raised. And justice, not your version, not revenge, not bitterness, but holy, sacred justice is being served. You never had to avenge yourself. You only had to endure. And because you endured, now God will rule. And when he rules, no manipulation can undo it. No performance can delay it. No charm, no tears, no fake apologies can bend the outcome. They thought they broke you. But in reality, your suffering broke the silence of heaven, and the one who saw it all, even what you couldn't put into words, has declared, "Enough." Your suffering was a test, but they failed it. You didn't know it at the time, but every hardship you endured was more than just personal pain. It was a divine test, not for you, but for those around you. Yes, you were the one bleeding, you were the one crying yourself to sleep, you were the one being lied on and pushed away, but God wasn't just watching your tears, He was watching their reaction to them. You were the holy mirror that God held up to expose hearts. While you were falling apart, He wasn't just seeing how low you would go, He was seeing who would come close to lift you, and who would stand back, laugh and gossip. And sadly, many of them, including the narcissist, failed that test miserably. See, God doesn't just judge wickedness based on what people do to Him. He also weighs how they treat the ones He sent. And whether they know it or not, you were sent. Sent to reveal, sent to confront, sent to reflect the hidden condition of their soul. You never asked to be the test, but you became one the moment they had to decide, would they honor the pain in front of them, or would they trample it underfoot? Some of them pretended they didn't see your brokenness, but heaven saw that they did. They watched you show up tired, drained, emotionally wounded, and instead of offering compassion, they chose convenience. They chose silence. They chose to believe the narcissist version of you because it was easier than facing the truth. And some didn't just fail by omission, they failed with cruelty. They laughed, they accused, they treated your healing journey like drama, like inconvenience, like proof you were too much. But what they didn't understand is that your pain was sacred. Your suffering was heaven's measuring stick. You weren't sent into their life to impress them, you were sent to test them. Would they love without strings? Would they defend the voiceless? Would they recognize the presence of God in someone who looked like a mess? They didn't. They were so busy protecting their image, protecting their comfort, protecting the narcissist, that they missed the holy test standing right in front of them. And when heaven took the exam back, it was stained with arrogance, pride, and selfishness. They didn't just fail, they failed boldly, proudly, unapologetically. And here's the hardest part. Some of them were people you loved, people you prayed for, people you would have taken a bullet for. That's what made the test hurt so much. It wasn't just strangers who failed, it was family, it was friends, it was church folk. And yet even in that betrayal, God was doing something eternal. He was dividing, He was revealing. He was showing you who was truly aligned with Him and who only knew how to perform goodness. You thought the trial was about survival, but it was actually about separation. God used your suffering to draw a line, and now that the line is clear, He will bless you in ways that cannot include the ones who failed you, because their hearts have already been judged unfit to carry your next season. This wasn't just about your pain, it was about their pride, and now heaven has written a grade in ink that cannot be erased. If this truth hits home, if you've lived through a test you didn't sign up for, comment below, "I was the test they failed." Your voice may be the encouragement someone else needs right now. Let your experience testify that God doesn't test to destroy. He tests to reveal what can't stay hidden. They laughed, but heaven was silent for a reason. They laughed at you like your pain was a punchline. They chuckled behind closed doors, rolled their eyes at your tears, and whispered things they thought would never be heard. They saw your brokenness as weakness, your trauma as drama, your spiritual battles as emotional instability, and when you finally collapsed under the weight of everything you had carried in silence, they didn't reach for your hand. They reached for a story to tell about you. They didn't understand what they were doing. They didn't realize that when they laughed at you, they weren't just mocking a person, they were mocking a process that God Himself allowed. Because while they saw only the shattered pieces of your life, God saw sacred ground. While they saw failure, heaven saw formation. But they couldn't see that. All they saw was a reason to feel superior. It's easy to laugh when you don't carry the weight. It's easy to judge when you haven't walked through fire. But laughter becomes dangerous when it's directed at someone God is using to shake the room spiritually. What they didn't know was that your suffering was a furnace, a divine refiner's fire, and that mockery in the presence of God's process invites consequences. But instead of reverence, they chose ridicule. They assumed heaven's silence was approval, that because no lightning struck, no immediate downfall happened, and no public exposure came, they were in the clear. But that's where they were wrong. Heaven's silence is never indifference. It is restraint. The judge doesn't speak until the evidence is complete, and God, in His justice, will always let people walk all the way into their arrogance before He answers. He lets them reveal what's truly inside. God could have exposed them the moment they slandered you. He could have corrected them the first time they lied, the first time they mocked, the first time they spread poison in your name. But instead He was quiet. Not because He agreed with them, but because He was giving them time to repent. And they wasted it. They mistook silence for approval, mercy for permission, patience for absence. And while they were mocking you, something sacred was happening in the unseen. Heaven was gathering evidence. Every laugh, every cold remark, every passive-aggressive smile, every attempt to minimize your story. It was all written down. God may not have spoken publicly in your defense back then, but He was collecting a record that would one day speak louder than any earthly voice. What they didn't understand is that heaven always watches how people treat the wounded. God doesn't measure character by how someone behaves in the spotlight, but by how they act when someone around them is bleeding. And when they saw you bleeding, they didn't run to help, they ran to spectators' seats. The most tragic thing is not that they laughed, it's that they thought they were safe in doing so. They thought God had excused them. They believed the silence meant, "This doesn't matter to me." But heaven's silence was never a dismissal, it was a delay, a space for them to wake up, soften, turn, and make it right. But instead of humbling themselves, they dug deeper into pride. And now that heaven's court has opened its mouth, it is no longer their version of the story that will be heard. It is God's. The laughter that once echoed in the background of your pain is now evidence of who they really were when they thought no one holy was watching. And what they used to laugh at will now become the very thing that convicts them. Not because you asked for revenge, but because God decided it was time to answer the cruelty that tried to masquerade as confidence. God allowed the mockery to test hearts, and they failed. There are times when God doesn't stop the cruelty, not because He approves of it, but because He is using it. He allows the laughter, the betrayal, the mockery, the silence from people who should have stood by you, not to break you, but to reveal them. Pain has a way of unveiling what praise cannot. When God allows mockery to go unchecked, it is never because He has abandoned the righteous. It is because He is testing the hearts of those near. In the grand courtroom of heaven, your tears weren't just signs of agony. They were instruments of revelation. God was looking beyond the surface. He was examining the people in the room, the friends, the family, the colleagues, the fellow churchgoers, not to see how loud they could sing, but to see how quiet they would be when someone they claimed to love was in pain. And one by one, their true character was revealed. You didn't know it then, But every moment of silence from those who claimed to care about you was a verdict being written. Every time they listened to lies but didn't come to you, every time they excused the narcissist's behavior and blamed your emotions, every time they chose neutrality when God required courage, heaven took note. And while they thought they were protecting their comfort, their image, their alliances, they were failing the test of compassion, integrity, and truth. God already knew what was in their hearts, but you didn't. That's why he let it unfold the way he did. He let the layers peel back slowly. He let the gossip run a little further. He let the betrayal play out a little longer, because you had to see who they really were, not through words, but through their choices in your suffering. And some of them, people you trusted, failed that test so deeply that God himself had to remove them from your next chapter. It wasn't enough that they saw you hurt. Many of them used it. Some used your brokenness to elevate themselves, to look strong or loyal by comparison. Some used it to spread their own version of your story. And some, even worse, stood back and did nothing, not because they didn't believe you, but because standing beside you would have cost them too much. But in heaven's courtroom, silence in the face of injustice is not neutral, it's complicit. And every moment God allowed the cruelty to continue, it wasn't because he didn't love you. It was because he was watching them. And they failed. What makes this failure more tragic is that many of them thought they passed. They walked away feeling justified. They convinced themselves that you were unstable, too emotional, bitter, dramatic, difficult to love. They rehearsed their explanations in the mirror. They even quoted scripture to themselves to feel righteous. But God does not judge according to appearances. He judges the heart. And he saw through every justification, every excuse, every spiritualized betrayal. The test was simple. Would they love mercy, do justice, and walk humbly? And when mercy was required, they withheld it. When justice was needed, they chose silence. When humility was called for, they leaned into pride. They were tested, and they failed. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly, until the only thing left was for God to draw a line and say, no more. And now that he has, the relationship can never return to what it was, because tests are meant to separate, to sift, to sanctify. God will not allow those who failed the test of your pain to enter the sacred space of your restoration, not because you're bitter, but because they've been weighed, they've been examined, and heaven has already declared them unfit for the blessing that's coming next. This isn't about vengeance. It's about divine order. God cannot bless what refuses to be honest. He cannot elevate what refuses to humble itself. And he will not send his anointed back into the arms of those who use their wounds as weapons. You were the one being wounded, but they were the ones being watched. And when the test came, they didn't just walk away from you. They walked away from what heaven was doing right in front of them. Heaven's verdict has been issued. They're now on the run. There comes a moment in every divine process when God stops watching silently and begins to rule openly. That moment has come. The verdict is no longer pending. Heaven has ruled. And the ones who mocked you, betrayed you, slandered you, and found pleasure in your pain are no longer free to roam in their pride. They are now running from the consequences of what they sowed. They didn't believe it would come to this. For so long they walked in boldness, untouched, unchallenged, as if there would never be a day of reckoning. They told lies with confidence. They played the victim while casting you as the villain. They painted you as unstable while hiding the instability of their own souls. And for a while, it worked. People believed them. You were isolated. You questioned your own worth, your sanity, your faith. But God never stopped keeping record. He never forgot what they did. And now he has spoken. When heaven rules, It does so with finality. This isn't a human courtroom where evidence can be suppressed or manipulated. In heaven's courtroom, nothing is hidden. Every motive, every scheme, every smirk when you cried, every lie they rehearsed and repeated, it's all been laid bare. And once the gavel comes down in that realm, things begin to shift in the natural. Doors close, exposure begins, peace departs from the wicked, and suddenly the ones who once laughed are the ones now looking over their shoulders. They're not running from you, they're running from what they know is coming, because deep down, even narcissists know when God is no longer backing away. Something shifts in their atmosphere. What used to be easy becomes complicated. The charm stops working. The manipulation turns against them. People who once sided with them begin to pull away. Conversations grow cold. Their name, once praised, now carries discomfort. It's not punishment from you. It's a shift in heaven's posture toward them. There is no refuge for the one who has been declared guilty by the judge of all things. They can change cities, change stories, change masks, but they cannot change the evidence heaven holds. They cannot undo what was recorded when they chose cruelty over compassion, pride over humility, performance over repentance. And though you may never get the apology, the restitution, or the full truth told on this side of eternity, it doesn't matter, because God has issued the ruling, and the weight of that ruling follows them. They may appear composed, but their spirit is restless. Their dreams are disturbed. Their steps are uncertain. That's what happens when you offend someone God was using to reveal truth. What they thought was freedom was actually mercy on borrowed time. And now that time is up. They are running not from you, but from the presence that once protected them while they had the chance to repent. It's gone now. The grace to keep lying is gone. The favor they abused has been lifted, and in its place stands something they never expected, the silence of God. And his silence, once comforting, is now terrifying. You are not the one being pursued. They are. You have peace, and they have panic. You have clarity, and they have confusion. You have restoration, and they have the weight of what they built on deception. And that weight doesn't lift. It follows. It tightens. It haunts. That's what a divine ruling does. It lingers until the fruit of every action comes to harvest. This is not the season where you fight back. It's the season where heaven fights for you. You were the suffering servant. They were the unrepentant accuser. And now the roles have shifted. You're walking in the light. They're hiding in the shadows they created. What began as a mockery has now turned into judgment. Not by your hands, but by the one who watched it all and waited until it was time. And now it is. God has ruled, and you are free. There is a sacred stillness that follows a divine verdict. Not the silence of confusion, not the stillness of despair, but a holy hush, the kind that settles over the soul when heaven has spoken and nothing else needs to be said. That's where you are now. You've walked through the fire, you've endured the mocking, you've stood silent while your name was dragged through the mud, while your character was questioned, while your heart was dissected by people who never knew your story. You waited for God, and now God has ruled. You are no longer carrying the weight of injustice. You are not standing in the courtroom anymore. You are walking out of it, and not as a defendant, not even as a witness, but as the one in whose favor the ruling was made. God has declared you innocent, and his verdict isn't based on their opinion, their gossip, or the image they created of you. His verdict is based on the truth he saw when no one else was watching, the kind of truth that doesn't need to be proven because it was lived. Through your silence, your endurance, your prayers, and your tears. He saw every moment you were misrepresented. He saw when they smiled to your face and stabbed you in your absence. He saw when you were too weary to defend yourself, but too faithful to retaliate. And while they thought your silence was weakness, God was using it as testimony. Now that testimony has been weighed, and heaven has rendered its judgment. You are free. This freedom is not symbolic, it is spiritual, emotional, and eternal. You are free from the shame that was never yours to carry. You are free from the labels they tried to attach to your name. You are free from the guilt that haunted you after every manipulative conversation. You are free from the torment of wondering if you were the problem. You are free from the lie that you were too much, too sensitive, too emotional, too broken. You are free from needing closure from people who were never sent to give it to you. This freedom is not about escaping them. It's about returning to yourself, the self God always saw, always loved, always protected, even when the world tried to dismantle you. This freedom is not about pretending it didn't happen. It's about realizing that what happened does not have the authority to define you anymore. Because you are not the same person who cried on the bathroom floor, begging God to explain why the people you trusted turned away. You are not the same person who stayed silent just to keep the peace. You are not the same person who held your breath in rooms where your name was being discussed like it had no value. That version of you died in the fire, and what walked out is stronger, wiser, sanctified. Not because of what you did, but because of what God has done in you. You are not surviving anymore. You are standing. Standing with dignity, standing in clarity, standing in an authority that only those who've been broken and rebuilt by God can understand. Your discernment has been sharpened. Your peace has become your weapon. Your presence no longer begs for acceptance. It commands respect, not because of pride, but because of divine restoration. They don't have to admit what they did. They don't have to apologize. They don't even have to understand who you've become, because their permission was never necessary for your deliverance. You don't need validation from people who forfeited the right to walk with you when they watched you bleed and turned their heads. What you need and what you now have is the affirmation of heaven. And heaven has ruled. Heaven has said, you are free to go forward. You are free to stop explaining yourself. You are free to breathe again. You are free to trust again. You are free to rebuild without guilt, to love without fear, to rise without apology. And what God opens, no man can shut. Yes, you still carry scars, but those scars are no longer signs of shame. They are seals of survival. They are proof that you lived through betrayal and came out not just breathing, but blessed. They are reminders that God never wastes pain, that He does not ignore injustice, and that He knows how to make all things new, including you. And now, the people who once watched your downfall will have to watch your rising, not because you sought revenge, but because God honors those who honor Him in the fire. You are the living proof that divine justice does not move at the speed of human approval. It moves at the rhythm of God's sovereignty, steady, silent, and unstoppable. This final declaration from heaven is not temporary. It cannot be overturned. There are no appeals in God's courtroom. The gavel has come down. The case is closed. And you, not the narcissist, not the slanderer, not the ones who stood by and watched, you are free. Free to rebuild. Free to rejoice. Free to become everything God said you were before they ever tried to break you. This is not just your healing. This is your release. You don't enter this new chapter hoping for justice. You enter it knowing justice has already been done. God saw the betrayal. He measured the silence. He ruled in your favor. Now you are no longer bound by their lies, their absence, or their control. You are covered, called, and completely free. Let them wonder. Let them watch. But don't look back. If this spoke to your soul, comment, God ruled in my favor. Heaven's gavel broke every chain. Now walk like someone who knows they'll never be bound again.